This morning we start with a very interesting panel, and I'm very glad to have two distinguished speakers and guests to begin the discussion with their insights on two very important regions for PASOS. If you remember, a couple of years ago we started a rather loud and powerful discussion on what can PASOS do in Central Asia. It resulted in a 2-year project that completed last year, opening doors for policy making in Central Asia. We looked at the capacities of organizations and whether there are organizations and potential partners for PASOS, potential members, but also sort of friends in Central Asia who share our goals, but also the methods and approaches. And therefore, I would propose today to start with one of our guests, Ambassador Patricia Flor, who is the EU Special Representative in Central Asia, to offer us her insights on the region, on the state of civil society in the region, also the future goals. How can we be part of it as an organization, members of PASOS, to try to complete those of the European Union and also of our member states that we represent here. I would then propose to continue with our second guest, Mr. Nicola Bertolini, who's responsible for the area that many PASOS members represent, the Western Balkans. We have active project there at the moment, we have had projects before, but also about Turkey, a country that we have no members, that maybe we should look after and have more presence in Turkey and issues concerning it. In my view, being kind of a link between Central Asia and our current membership. Then we continue with two very interesting papers from our members. Iveta Kazoka from PROVIDUS will present her insights and, as we discussed yesterday, share reflections on the two talks that we have at the opening speeches about how new members of the European Union, and when we say new, it already becomes a little bit misleading, whether it's the new from 2004 or new from 2000 later on or new 2012. So I think this is the first cohort of 2004, if I'm not wrong. So the new members of 2004, how did they feel when they were integrated from the perspective of civil society? How did organizations change? How they adapted? How much influence they felt they had in the process of integration, but also becoming members and once they became members. And Iveta has promised to offer us reflections on that. And finally, and I hope that I pronounced the name correctly, Yergi Urmo from the Institute of Democracy from Albania will offer us a very interesting insight, again, on how civil society feels before or during the process of becoming a member of the European, or wanting becoming a member of the European Union. Very critical points to raise. I think many that we still share even being members, and I think very relevant to the regions that we are looking at today from our perspective and our experience there. So I will leave the floor to the speakers. Each of our distinguished guests have 10 to 12 minutes to offer their reflections, and then the floor is open. I have spoken to all, and we are very much looking forward to your questions. Specific, more general, but the questions are very important. So I would give the floor to you.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone, and thank you to PASOS for inviting me to open your conference today. Now, I looked at the title of the first session, which is about European integration as a keyword, and another keyword, of course, is time to press the reset button, which I took to be also to look at what is our experience so far, where do we think that we should actually go from here in terms of Central Asia. Now, I'd like to start by saying that, of course, if I look back actually into the 90s, when we did not yet have a Central Asia strategy, yet at that time what we did have was a starting EU engagement towards the East. Actually at that time under the heading of enlargement, and that actually departed from the assumption that, of course, the best way to ensure our own prosperity and stability is really to spread EU values, principles and standards to the East, and also to share, of course, the European experience in overcoming centuries of strife and of war and of confrontation by regional and economic cooperation and political dialogue. And I'm saying this because I work on a region, namely Central Asia, where none of that has been achieved now. There is still a danger of conflict and confrontation within countries, but also between countries. And there is a big gap in terms of regional cooperation, which of course also makes it very difficult to develop the overall region as a whole. Now, in 2007, the European Union then decided to adopt the EU Central Asia strategy. And let me also make clear here that the Central Asia strategy is not a Central Asian variation of the Eastern Neighbourhood Policy or the Eastern Partnership. And that has to do with the fact that indeed Central Asia, in terms of its history, in terms of its culture, in terms of its setup, in terms of its peoples, is a different place. Yes, they were Soviet republics, and they have that in common with the Baltics. But and of course with the Caucasus and with Ukraine and with others. But at the same time, Central Asia really is a different region and therefore also demands its own approach. The Central Asia strategy set out very broad goals and priorities. So priorities such as foster rule of law, human rights, democratization, civil society, which concerns you, economic development, rural development, education, regional cooperation, and so forth. And you can see from this that the assumption, of course, was not that this will now be achieved within the next 5 years. It is a long-term vision. It's the vision of actually bringing these countries closer to us in terms of our standards, but we have to acknowledge that it requires time. Now, if I now for a moment look at what would I say are the results? And so I would say that the results are that today the EU is well established in Central Asia as a partner. We have EU delegations, we have an institutional framework of political dialogue, EU Central Asia ministerial meetings, human rights dialogues, regional platforms on water and the environment, which I know where many of PASOS people are working on, regional platform on also rule of law and also on education. We also, of course, have supported Central Asia through diverse programs and projects with up to 750 million euro over these last 5 years. And of course, I can, if you like, I can also later give you some examples of what was done. So I think in this sense, the EU is now accepted as a partner, and I do also think that we are welcome in the region. However, if I look now at, let's look at progress, say, in terms of human rights, democracy, rule of law. Well, definitely we have not made progress enough. This is clear. There are still many, many problems. We still see many human rights violations. And of course, rule of law is not established, and we have also a lot of corruption. However, we have also a young generation which is becoming more active with a different kind of education. We have seen legal reforms. There are today ombudspersons on human rights established as institutions in all the Central Asian countries. So we have made some progress, and we have also in Kyrgyzstan seen for the first time ever a peaceful handover from one president to another through democratic elections. So that also is a landmark in the region. We don't know how it will end, as we don't know how the Arab Spring will turn out in the end, but I think it's worth to be noted. In terms of the economy, the EU is today the most important export market for Kazakhstan. So we are also an economic player in the region, but the potential of the region is by far not developed. And one of the reasons is that small and medium enterprises have still a very hard time to invest in the region, to engage in the region, because the climate is very difficult for them. So there's a lot to do also in the future. Education, people to people. There are student exchanges, many of the young people also come to the EU to study here. Again, I think education should be and will be a priority for the EU in the future, because this is really the foundation for future generations, and therefore it's very important to work on that. And one also has to say that the education system in the region is not in very good shape, one has to say. So in that sense, it's also worthwhile investing there. I've said that regional cooperation is a problem in the region, and just to say why is this the case? It has to do with the fact that the Central Asians are recently independent, in the sense that they are independent states just 20 years. It's not a very long time for a state, and that means that for them to defend this independence and sovereignty still is a major policy goal. And it means that they are prone to look very strictly at what is our national interest and how does it clash with our neighbours, and then to defend this against the neighbours, rather than saying if we work together and agree on certain procedures and certain standards, actually, for instance, for border management, it would make all our lives better. Therefore, the EU has a number of programs in this area, for instance, border management, also in terms of trade facilitation, people-to-people contact, but it is still very difficult work. So, where do I think where we are? Of course, the type of transformation that we see in Central Asia is a very slow one, and so therefore there is still a lot to do. But one also has to see that these states do not have a long experience to build on, in the sense of having been states before, having had a democratic tradition, having had a vibrant civil society or any of that. No, it's not, they can't build on this, and that also distinguishes them, of course, from other parts of the former Soviet Union. So therefore, we have to work with them. There is evolution, I would call that. It's not as fast as we would like, but they also have to decide on their own pace. There is a much better understanding today between the European Union and Central Asia about where they are, what they want, what our expectations are. So for instance, they do accept that the European Union and its programs and policies comes as a package. That means that yes, they can say we need big infrastructure or we need more economic development, but they have to accept that the EU also then wants to have a dialogue about rule of law and about human rights, and it's part of who we are, and it's part of the package, and they do understand this today. So should we now consider a reset, or should we look at changing in some way our approach, or what would it mean for Central Asia? Now, of course, I don't think anyone would argue we should go back to paying less attention to them. At least I don't hope that anyone would argue that. Because I think if I look at the region today, there is untapped potential also for us. But we also have neighbors such as Afghanistan, China, the Russian Federation. And so therefore, certainly the European Union should actually, if we can, engage more. And of course, we should also, and we are doing that, work with Central Asia in terms of the overall stabilization of the bigger region, taking into account Afghanistan, because there is also a big potential between Central Asia and the South. I mean, making if you go back in the history, the old Silk Road, of course, it was China, so East-West, China, Central Asia to the European sphere, but it was also South Asia, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, going through Central Asia to us. And it would be actually very beneficial to everyone if some of these old bridges and old roads could be rebuilt and reactivated. The progress is too slow, yes, but I think it's a historic process, and now here I come to something which is also very important psychologically. In the EU, I think in the EU and in the Western world, clocks run quite fast. So you are used to actually doing policy adjustments, constantly reconsidering. In Central Asia, this is not the case. They still have a very different attitude towards time. I would say that if you start working there, be prepared that you need about a year to actually be accepted, to finally get more openness in your meetings and more also willingness to engage with you. So they would not take sudden and immediate changes in terms of policies or principles lightly. I think that for them this would be very difficult to digest. So therefore, I do think that, especially in Central Asia, the EU should be very clear about what our standards are, what our principles and values are, where we do want to go, where we see the priorities, where we can actually invest and support our Central Asian partners, and then to have a constant dialogue on that basis and not disrupt this process by adjustments which will be difficult to understand for our partners. Then what other tools, what leverage do we actually have? And I'm saying that again because, of course, in the Eastern Partnership there are certain conditionalities. There's also an approach which says more for more and so forth. Now, I don't think we have the same leverage in Central Asia for the very reason that we don't have the same type of cooperation or partial integration on offer to them. And so therefore our ability to actually impose any type of conditionalities on them is much more restricted. Therefore we have to improve the tools which we have, but they are more tools of persuasion and dialogue rather than a question of conditionality. And in that regard, I think that civil society and private business should play a key role. Why? Because the government-to-government dialogue is now well established. And I know that nothing in Central Asia happens without a green light from above. So only when you have achieved agreement actually from the president, usually a green light that then allows the system and also the NGOs to actually engage in a certain direction. But building on that, I think it's then very important to go beyond the simple, bureaucratic contact and to actually get, people on the ground to talk to each other, and of course also people from Central Asia to come to the European Union and to experience how we solve some of the problems here. And again, to give you the issue of water, I think, to acquaint them with how it works on the Danube, in the Balkans, where we also have had recently war and confrontation. Nonetheless, there is an agreement how to manage the water flow. So these kind of examples can be very enlightening to them, and they can be also supported from the EU side through the platform for water and the environment. But of course, the real context should be on the ground. The same, I think, goes for local administration, so the communities. Again, one of the areas where we try to push the Central Asians to reconsider is to devolve power to the local sphere, to have more self-government in the communities, and I think that would be very important, and certainly there are many here in the EU with a very large experience in that regard. Finally, I don't think we should be discouraged by the fact that things are not going as fast as we wish. I think we should have the confidence in our own model and in the attractiveness of the European and EU model to also in the future attract people from Central Asia. But it is a long-term endeavor, of course, and so far we need to keep going. Support by EU member states, new, but not so new anymore. Let me say that as an EU South Central Asia, I will go to Madrid next week actually, but my engagement with member states that are really interested in Central Asia is mostly East, and so it is Poland, it is the Czech Republic, it's Slovakia, but it's also the Baltics, of course, with a very specific, I would also say, somehow emotional attachment to that. So I build on that and I rely on that, and of course, as I've said, NGOs working in the region, despite the difficulties, are very welcome partners to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Flor. I think, in my mind, questions running back and forth, and I could start a discussion right now. One conclusion is something that I remember myself on that you Westerners have the watches, but we have the time. And it is a very different way we think about policy development, including when we look at the region of Western Balkans and Turkey, where we want the progress to proceed and to be fast. And I think it very much links into what Yergi is going to present later on, what we want to see as civil society organizations, what we see as being civil society organizations, who they are, how can they help. And there was an interesting title of a conference that I came about when I was preparing for this, which said, Civil Society Transformation on the Way to EU. So it appears to be that the civil society has to transform on the way to EU, instead of trying the EU to transform, to understand the countries, their future members better. And that was a conference organized by the civil society themselves. So I think there's an interesting conflict and probably an interesting discussion of who will be who and what that goes. Maybe a bit of a puzzle. I'd like to pass it on to our next distinguished guest and to have more insight.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning to everybody. Well, I think that the big difference between Central Asia and Western Balkans and Turkey is that in Western Balkans and Turkey we have an accession policy. So we are trying to make these countries raising standards in order to be eligible to enter into the club. Now, I would like to point in my speech 4 important aspects of the civil society in these countries. And these are partnership, results, dialogue, and sustainability. So partnership, we are now here because PASOS is one of our framework partnership agreements. We have established 18, and PASOS is now delivering, we hope, the results that are expected. So it will be a 4 years engagement from our side and PASOS, and the organization belonging to PASOS, in order to build more actions in the specific sector, which is open governance, which is a very, very multi-dimensional sector. So networks, lobbying, sharing of experience, sharing of knowledge, research, are at the basis for any development of civil society. And PASOS is now putting forward some of this. And we hope that all the networks could be supported. Unfortunately, with our funds, we supported only the 10% of the applications we received. So PASOS should be aware that it's one of the best and should deliver as one of the best. So we are aiming to have a partnership. When you are partners, you are not donor, grantee. You are not contracting authority, contractor. You are partners. So you will have to stand also our claims, because we do not only finance part of your activity, but we want you to deliver what you promised to do. So we will be supporting you, but also reminding you of all the necessary steps that have to be done. We should aim to have more and more of these partnerships, because it's a more long-term engagement. But of course, we are still failing, because we still make projects and not operational support. We should be more and more engaged in giving possibilities for your organization to find a way to develop without depending on our financing. And I will talk later when I talk about sustainability. The second point is results. Focus on results. The time that the support to civil society was given only because it is good, healthy for democracy, these are becoming very much obsolete. We have to engage for results, and we have to be able to measure these results and to make visibility. Apart of the fact that I don't see the EU logo on this webpage, but we can talk later. Visibility is important because you can make it clear to politicians, to parliamentarians, to decision makers about what you're doing and the impact, the change you're bringing. So, this means that in the last year we developed a strategy, guidelines, with a set of results and indicators in order to measure the advancement of enabling environment, capacity building of civil society. A lot of results are there, a lot of indicators, and we aim to do with you an yearly measurement so that in our progress reports we can avoid sentences like there has been some improvement, but still there are needs to be overpassed. What does it mean? It means nothing. I want them to discuss about how effectively new laws are consulted with civil society. So now, I heard from my friend Vlado that in Montenegro now, maybe because I was there as well, but now they are improving a lot. But Montenegro is easier, because in Montenegro there are only few people, and they are all friends of their own relatives, so they can be selected by default. So Vlado told me that he is NGO representative in the working group for the Ministry of Justice for the reform of justice, correct? So I asked him, how were you selected? Well, we made an application, an open call, but then the Ministry of Justice decided. Okay. It's already a step forward, because in other countries there are no working groups. In Macedonia, I was told that there are no meetings, only sporadic meetings happen. And then, I mean, we have to be sure that we talk the same language with civil society and with governments. We can only do if we report on results and changes that are there year after year. One of the questions is about also representativeness, and I think that civil society has to work on constituency, representativeness. Because when you sit there in front of the government, they will ask you, whom do you represent? Are you a part of 4 or 5 people organization, or your organization has thousands and thousands of members? And in Western Balkans and Turkey as well, this is very new. This is also our fault, because donors initiated the whole business in society, funding. So we are guilty as well for the situation we have now, but we have to revert this towards a more citizens' participation. Third point, dialogue. In Bosnia and Macedonia, there is practically no dialogue. Even I remember that the director of the government office for civil society was speaking to me so negatively about civil society that I asked her, did you ever think to change job? I mean, you are not in the right post, because I mean, you are supposed to work for civil society, not against civil society. But on the side of civil society, you find the main organization telling me, we don't talk to this government. I mean, I say, wrong. moment is you have to find a way to talk to them. Because you have to represent also part of the citizens which do not find themselves represented by the political parties. And here there is also a strict line between opposition and civil society. Vocal civil society are often exchanged by the governments as opposition parties. This is the dead for you. Here we are hosted by the Czech Republic, and there is an historic, important movement of civil society also entering into policy. But the moment you enter into policy, you are a competitor. But the time you are still in civil society, you represent something that politicians need. So, you need to talk to the government. The government needs to talk to you because sometimes, many times in Western Balkans, there are experts in civil society organizations and not in the ministries. So you can add value to the work of governments. The accession is a country accession, it's not a government accession. It's not only civil society, it is all together. So, in both Bosnia and Macedonia, I propose to our technical assistants to intervene with sending a group of psychologists, even if I don't love this category, but a group of psychologists have to go there, work with civil society, make them understanding the powerful of dialogue, working with the governments, making them understanding the same, and then working together. But this is not a joke. This is not a joke. We need a psychologist to work with them. In some cases, we need independent psychologists in order to make them working together. But it's a matter of building trust. There is a lack of trust. We have to build trust. In Montenegro was easy because they are all close to each other, but in other countries there is this problem. Fourth, sustainability. We all aim at doing something which is sustainable. Well, actually, there are many areas in which we have to work with civil society in this country and with governments in order to make more sustainable our action. Institutional. We have to work to build institutions that in the government and in the social sector, in the civil society sector and the government could lead a more constructive dialogue between the two parts. We need institutional mechanisms because the moment we disappear and your country will be submerged by structural funds, if we don't have institutions in place, what you will find out is that civil society will not be financed. Because instead of financing bridges between civil society and governments, this money will finance roads and bridges like in Central Asia is needed. But we need to have institutions in place in order that the moment your country is becoming a member state, there is a structure, there is a policy, there are people engaged to provide support again still to civil society. Croatia has a model, this triangle. We don't know if this model will work because it's just a new one. And they didn't manage until now EU structural funds. They're starting now. We hope, but we intervened very late in Croatia with this guidance and strategy. Now, in the other countries which are in the accession process, we have to do it much before they will enter. So this is why it's important. We work with results, etc. Financial sustainability is not only to matter, but really to matter about your government's financing for civil society, which in some cases is incredibly high. Bosnia, 50 million euro per year. But 65% of this money is given without a call. 65% of 50 million euro. To whom? To friends to find all organization. I mean, this is a terrible area in which we have to work and we have to make it better. Then, financial sustainability means also that you depend less from donors. Your income, but this was not given to my colleague. Your income should be diversified, should have donations, philanthropy, membership, should have all these, because you should not depend on us. Because, concluding, we can come to a simplification of our financial regulations, even if we have to deal with thousands and thousands of lawyers who make our life more difficult. We can do this, but you should be able not to depend on us. And we have to work together in order to make you more capable to do things without our support. So partners, results. We have to focus on results. Dialogue is a central word and a central effort that we together we have to do. And sustainability. Always looking in front of you, not only at what we do today and tomorrow.
Thank you, Mr. Bertolini. As you see, observing the principles of time in Central Asia. No time, Europe, results, and timing. But I think that there is one thing that the Central Asian sort of structure, I think, could learn from Montenegro, for example. As far as I know, all have registered as NGOs and promoting their goals as some basic social structure becoming understandable also to EU other institutions. So maybe that's one of the experiences you could take over. But on this, half jokingly, I think it's time to pass on to our presentations about actual research about how organizations feel in EU, before EU, and how can they reach the results that we spoke about here. Has it happened with the former EU countries of the European Union? So pass on to you.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, audience. My task today is to look on the same issue that we are all discussing from a totally different perspective. Because mostly we've been talking about those countries and regions that are that are not part of European Union, for example, that are in Southeast Europe, Eastern Neighbours, Central Asia. But my main point today would be that those regions, those countries, EU member states as well, have a lot to learn from the experience of those countries that as recently as 10 years ago were not part of European Union, but right now have already had some maybe 6 years, some 8 or 9 years to integrate within the structures of European Union. And in my opinion, that experience has been quite inspiring, and I will share with you some preliminary observations from research that we have just started, and that will be ongoing throughout next year. But already now we can see some experience from those new EU member states that could be in use when we think also about Southeast Europe, Eastern Neighbours and Central Asia as well. So first of all, the new EU member states, and what I mean by new EU member states is those member states that have acceded to European Union in 2004 or later. How they feel right now here in European Union. If we look at this group as a category and see how the population responds in those countries to the same questions as the population of older member states, older member states are required to respond, then we see that there are some substantial differences. Some are positive differences, like, for example, new EU member states tend to trust the European Union more. They also see it in a better light. They believe more often that things are going in the right direction. And in general, they see a better future for the EU, for the European Union than the average of older member states do. So that's quite an optimistic picture, because it shows that the new EU member states have not been disillusioned from the process of joining the European Union or from being there, even though our own survey that we did in 4 specific new member states showed that the level of trust is quite low if you look at it from absolute numbers. But if we compare it to the older member states, then it's still higher. So new EU member states bring more optimism to European Union. There are certain problems as well. If we compare new European Union member states and older European Union member states, we see that the older member states have a clearer sense of belonging to European Union citizenship. They are more likely to respond that they feel as citizens of European Union. They also discuss European Union matters more frequently with their friends and relatives, which probably mean that they feel more engaged in European Union matters, and that they also feel that they can exert more influence in European Union, both as citizens and as member states. So in this respect, there is still some way to go for new EU member states, despite already being in this club for a certain amount of years. But there are no distinct differences regarding the knowledge on the basic institutional structure of the European Union between the older member states and new member states. We've also tried to look at some of the accession countries and see whether there are any distinct differences between these 3 groups: new member states, old member states, and those countries that are in the process of accession to European Union. And some of the most important findings that I would like to share with you is that there is very slight, sometimes even inexistent, difference between the knowledge in the population of those countries on how the European Union functions. For example, in Montenegro, the level of knowledge about European Union in greater population is the same as both in new member states and old member states. And also, what is interesting is that for accession countries, European Union is seen even in more positive light than for new member states or any member states in European Union. And I will explain a bit later why it matters, and why it matters also for Central Asia and those countries that are not even in an accession stage. What we have learned during interviews with representatives of those new European Union member states, and also people working in Brussels, in European Parliament, in Economic and Social Committee, in permanent representations and in other institutions, is that it's quite a steep learning curve for a country to get integrated in European Union. And that's why several people we interviewed said that what they found really useful was that prior to accession there was the stage where they could see and observe how European Union function, even though they could take no decisions in various matters. Because it's not obvious the way how the European Union works, how the decisions are being made for all the countries that are willing to join the European Union, or for example the countries in Central Asia. European Union decision making is based on a certain number of skills, a certain number of values that is not universal elsewhere, and it takes time to get used to them. And what do I mean by those values, by those skills? First of all, by observing how a European Union functions, for example, in Parliament, in a Commission, in various council configurations, and even on the working, especially on the working group level, you learn the skills of cooperating, of not polarizing issues, but on cooperating, on trying to reach consensus-based decisions. The second thing that you also learn by being an observer in various working groups and various institutions in European Union is the value of trying to build coalitions. That's also not self-evident for all the countries willing to join European Union. You also, and it's in my opinion, a very important thing, you also learn the value of competence, of good argument that should be on the basis of every decision that has to be taken. You have to convince a variety of member states coming from very different perspectives, and therefore your argument should be as good as possible. And that's something that several of people that I interviewed mentioned in this context. That at first, when still in the accession stage and during the first years of being part of European Union, they were quite silent. Because they didn't feel really secure that their arguments were to the same level as, for example, arguments coming from United Kingdom or for France. But they changed their procedures back at home, okay, and in the end, they learned those new qualities that you need in order to integrate successfully within the European Union. There are still some struggles. For example, still after 9-10 years after accession, there are some nuances of European Union decision making is lost. But still those struggles are not as substantial as could have been imagined prior to accession. So to conclude, I would say that despite the extreme complexity of the European Union functioning, it does not take long to integrate within European Union, to understand how it works and to be quite successful within European Union. Several people from older member states have admitted that they have been very surprised in how fast the representatives in new member states got really skilled and competent within this complex structure. Several of the best chairs of various meetings and members of parliament come from the new member states. Yes, there are some challenges, but the process itself has been impressive. And in my opinion, the main thing that could be taken from this experience and then shared with the countries that are in the accession stage and those that have some other contacts with European Union is that you shouldn't really underestimate the inspiring power of European Union to change by showing to change the practices back in those countries when they see how the things are done here in European Union. And so the focus, in my opinion, should be on building the capacity of government institutions back at home and also the civil society organizations in those countries by sharing and by the experience of European Union, by showing them here in Brussels, in other countries, how the decisions are being made, on what values are they based, and on what quality of reasoning and argumentation is expected. So,
thank you, Iveta. Thank you very much. Poor timekeeper for too many ideas, but it's time to switch from kind of an exposed evaluation on how civil society felt and feels currently to more ex-ante vision from Albania. It's a very deep insight, an analytical addition to discussions we have had before in PASOS, and also to what Iveta said, looking from the other side. hopefully having an interesting angle. So, Jurgi, please.
Thank you. Actually, after listening to Nicola, Nicola just ruined my presentation, actually, because I was planning to criticize everybody, including myself. Nicola already did that, including you. I would fully agree with all the points he mentioned, but I still see one point missing. In partnerships, it is important also to take risks. And this is an element that you didn't refer, and it's also an element that I don't see very present in the EU approach when it comes to civil society involvement in the EU accession reforms and civil society own development. Now, why I think that? Okay, we have the presentation. Okay. Why civil society involvement? It is involvement not only to improve laws, to improve reforms and the EU accession process of our own countries, but it's also important to improve the capacities of those societal actors beyond the state that are able to pay the bill of the EU accession and that should also benefit from the EU accession. This is one of the key, I would say, challenges and advantages that we should look at while discussing civil society involvement in EU accession. Now, what is the current situation in the Western Balkans? There are different forms and mechanisms of involving civil society in the policy process and in EU accession reforms, varying from very formalized and clear procedures to very vague ones. In essence, most of them are a copy-paste of the Croatian model. Well, in most of the countries, actually, except Albania. In Albania, we didn't even bother to copy Croatians. So nowadays, and in the past years in Albania, the government consults civil society only if and only when asked by the European Commission to do so. And now that leads also to some funny situations in Albania. One of the recent examples is the famous 30% gender quota. It took many years of struggle from civil society until some years ago to have a safeguarded 30% gender quota. Last year, one of the 12 priorities, it was the electoral reform, but most important to the Commission and also to the political parties, it was to tick that priority in the 12 priority list, rather than involving civil society. So the electoral reform was all set behind closed doors by the main 2 or 3 parties. Civil society was not really consulted, or maybe we were just asked, but then at the end they did whatever they thought it was better for them. So it noted a step backward for the 30% quota for gender representation and women empowerment in politics. Now, how much money did that cost to political parties? It costed roughly 100,000 euros to the big 3 parties, who won roughly 135 MP seats out of 140. And a record fine of roughly 50,000 euros was given to one small party that nobody has ever heard of. And you know why? Because they didn't meet the 30% quota for men, not for women. So their list was 90% women. And the Central Election Committee decided, you will have the biggest fine because you have discriminated men. Now, to get back to the policy brief. Actually, there are 3 messages. It's a 5-6 page, I think, long brief. But out of that 6 page, I would like everybody in the room to have at least 3 messages clear from that piece. The message 1, the first message, state of play. As I mentioned, there are different mechanisms there are also, yeah, that would be next slide. There are different mechanisms that deliver differently from country to country and from one area to another, depending on whether it is important to the government and to the political parties, and depending also on other factors. One of the common elements that all these practices have is that they all, in most of the cases, fail to deliver on civil society involvement in the policy-making processes. And as a result, although compared to some years ago, because now we speak of civil society involvement in policy processes, until some years ago we couldn't even speak about that. So there is progress, certainly. It's a progress that is being achieved in cooperation with both the EU, political actors and civil society in the region. But can it get any better? Of course, it can get, and it should get better. But currently we have a civil society influence as a hostage of reluctant political actors and unfriendly environment, exhaustive Brussels that mainly takes notice of insufficient consultations, etc. And it's a hostage also of ourselves, of civic actors not taking full responsibilities for civil society development and for building broader capacities to societal actors. Not least important, civil society involvement is still considered a capacity challenge rather than a democracy standard, as it, in my opinion, should be. The second message is why. Why is that situation? So what went wrong? There are a number of reasons that we should look at. There are things that we ignored at the beginning while we tried to set up these procedures and mechanisms of civil society involvement. There are myths that we believed, and there are risks that we didn't take. What did we ignore? We ignored the civil society that was really too weak to assume that responsibility. We have civil society in the Western Balkans. I have some figures in the next slide, where less than 50% of the public trusts civil society, according to Civicus in 2010 wave. It's 14% in Croatia, 31% in Macedonia, 32% in Albania, and nearly it's 45% in Kosovo. Civic engagement at extreme low levels, less than 25%. It's even less than political engagement of citizens. We have too many civil society organizations that are non-membership based, what Nicola mentioned actually, and civil society, so we have NGOs but not really civic initiatives that have backing from citizens and that have involvement from citizens. So we have also civil society that is strong and capable in urban areas but is almost inexistent in the peripheria or in those areas that are not really attractive to donors, including EU. Political actors, we thought or we expected that they won't trick the system through the formal box-speaking practice. So they would invite us, listen to us, and then do whatever they think is okay for them. Also, we thought that political actors would improve the civil society environment, even there are no sticks around. Obviously, we were wrong. There are also, we ignored sometimes the wrong ideas coming from Brussels, meaning that more money to IPA instruments for civil society would mean stronger civil society. That is not true. For that, grassroots will eventually learn the rules of procedures for IPA applications. I mean, grassroots would not even care for that. I mean, to grassroots, more important is the environment where they operate and whether it is enough and whether the conditions are in place for them to deliver on citizen needs. Or the other wrong idea that TAXO will improve the legal environment. I mean, look, TAXO can assist efforts of civil society to improve the legal environment, but TAXO will not remain in the region forever. And it is up to the civil society actors and other stakeholders at societal level that will make sure that the environment is improved, legal policy environment, and that it will stay that way. Myths that we believed, that delivering impact, civil society impact, is a question of money. Well, actually, as shown in the slide, the Croatian experience shows that it is not really a matter of money. Personally, I believe that the civil society will deliver more impact if there is more trust from the public and the citizens in the civil society actors. The absorption capacity is way much better than that of the government. That's another fact that was brought to the attention by the PCSDN recent analysis. Another myth is that civil society in the region has absolute no capacity to deliver impact. And that's from where we get new donors coming and landing in the region with new strategies, building every possible capacity from scratch. And that's really a wrong approach, because they ignore not only their own previous investments, but they ignore also the existing societal asset and civil society asset that is present in the region. So, looking at the Macedonian experience, 2003-2012, 10 years, it's clear that advocacy has improved or deteriorated regardless of the fact that organizational capacity has been equally bad for the 10 years. So, the only case where the two curves between advocacy and another dimension of civil society involvement are the same is when we compare advocacy and legal environment. The next slide. One more. Yeah. So looking at Albania and Macedonia in the past 10 years, advocacy efforts of civil society have improved or deteriorated almost with the same pace as it did the legal environment. Okay, I'll go directly to the final points. The policy brief has three main recommendations that I admit it's a bit complicated the way that I put there, but thank God I followed the advice of one of the peer reviewers who said that if you leave it this way, everybody will agree and will go home safely and do nothing about it. So you better be more specific. So I tried to be more specific. So how to move beyond the box-ticking practice? Starting from the position of the policy brief, some of the measures that EU, civil society and state actors could undertake include the following, starting with establishing more rigid and more clear procedures for involvement of civil society with binding rules for involvement of civil society actors and other interest groups. I would also suggest that the European Commission progress reports focus directly on civil society development and involvement in policy processes and dedicate a separate section to that. More flexible and direct support for civic initiatives. One of the involving civil society in performance screening. The region now is is progressing slowly, and following the Montenegrin case where civil society is involved in EU accession, I'm not really sure that was the best setting for Montenegro. it's up to them to see in the future how it moves and how it develops. But I would see a more active civil society involved in the performance screening of the country's reforms. Last but not least, involvement of non-state actors in EU accession must translate in concrete tasks for us. Not only to be there just for the sake of being there, but for assuming the responsibilities that we need to have from the beginning, and that is to build more capacities for more civic actors and for other societal actors in the country. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Gary. I saw discussion at the beginning of Mr. Bertolini's paper quite a while ago. He's taken a lot of notes and is ready to discuss both of the papers presented. So my suggestion is that I give the floor back to the panelists for a brief reflection on what they heard, and also the inputs for the discussion that they hope to follow. We did take 10 minutes. We were 10 minutes late to begin the panel, but I hope that we don't steal time from the coffee break, that we can safely continue with our discussions and also with the panel. That is true. So, Mr. Bertolini, your reflections, and I will give you the microphone.
Okay. Thank you very much to tell us what we do wrong. Actually, it's not working, yes. Actually, I think that we have already, I mean, it's a matter of misunderstanding in some points. More money for civil society means a stronger civil society. No, we don't think so. We would like to give less money. And this is why we work on sustainability. It's more important sometimes to send an expert. For instance, in Macedonia, there is a problem between the law on associations and the law on personal income tax. There is a mismatching of the two laws. We will send an expert to work with the Minister of Finance and make it easier for civil society to have benefits from taxes. So this costs almost nothing, and will have a bigger impact than financing a lot of advocacy civil society organizations protesting in front of a Minister of Finance. So I mean, we don't want to give more money. We would like to do less, but internally we fight in order to have 2% of IPA resources devoted to civil society. 2%. BCDNN was asking for, I mean, in Macedonia I was brought to a meeting in which they say, no, but the European Parliament said that we will say you should send 15% of IPA resources to civil society. And they said, it's good to have dreams, always good. So, illusions and dreams are important for our life. Grassroots organization to learn EC procedures, but no, this is a misunderstanding. Grassroots organizations funded through our sub-granting should not understand, they should not make it proper the EU procedures, because it's the grantee in the country, the organization, that will set procedures, and the easiest as possible, so it's not true. Now, TAXO will improve legal environment? Of course not. TAXO is, as you say, an assistance to this process. TAXO should make capacity building for you, should send experts to work with the governments in order to improve the legal environment, should do this, but not be an actor. In fact, our intention is to phase out TAXO. So it's not that we are going to make a dependence on technical assistance forever. Absorption capacity is bigger in civil society organization than in government. But of course, this is something like discovering the hot water. I mean, we gave, for instance, 10% of the proposals we receive, we award. Immediately we pay 80% of the funds for the first year. This is the logic of grants. In projects with ministries, it's much more difficult and longer. So, of course, the absorption capacity is higher in civil society. So, this is discovering things. Now, I would like to add a couple of things. You mentioned progress report should focus on a particular section. Yes, this is our fight. So we already started 1 year ago to fight for this. And when we will have a first baseline on our indicators, this will feed into the progress report. So next year progress report should be better than this year progress report for civil society is concerned. Last but not least, when I was reading your paper, I read both papers that are very interesting. In fact, I was saying many things that I would like you to say were included in your paper. So, yes, it's true that I spoiled your paper, but be careful. Why do we want to have indicators? Because the existing ones are for, allow me to say, for nothing. The USAID Sustainability Index is calculated on 8 people in each country, making every year an assessment of different issues. Statistically, it's not correct. And then they aggregate the numbers into these numbers that you saw. I mean, Gerdi, I would like you make a research on our indicators next year, so that you can have better inputs, because we have to be statistically correct and have these indicators. In fact, we are now, Tax already launched a survey to a number of civil society organizations. Only in Bosnia, the database of Taxo has 1,600 organizations. And then we can build indicators that are more meaningful. So, we have to be careful in using this indicator coming with USAID. I told this to USA Embassy, and they said, we agree with you. This is not good indicator. So, quote me in saying this, because, I mean, we cannot judge our thinking in indicators based on the personal judge of 8 people. Even in Montenegro, 8 people is a very small number. So.
Thank you very much. And hearing all this, yes, I will pass it on, but I'll pass it on to Ambassador Flor to her concluding remarks. And on my side, I'd like to add that I wish that in a couple of years, or maybe more years and longer time, we have the same dynamics of discussion about Central Asia and the European Union. Whether in criteria and adults, but for us it is of course important that how can we as PASOS and as a network of organizations enter this realm, and how do you see our place and the role of very vibrant yet very unstructured civil society in Central Asia.
Yes, thank you. And, of course, the presentations and the discussion again brought to mind to me how big, in some respects, the gap really is about which we are speaking. So I will say a few words about civil society in Central Asia. And of course, one of the problems is that civil society in most of the Central Asian countries, less in Kyrgyzstan, but in the others, it is very tightly controlled. It's very restricted. It is, in many instances, only taking place as far as the government and the state allows it to take place. And it is also sometimes dependent on funding that comes from government sources, which of course then also begs this question. It doesn't necessarily mean that then the civil society activities do not deserve to be called like that. So I know that, for instance, in Uzbekistan you have some NGOs that work in the social sphere, in the humanitarian sphere, on orphan children, on on health issues, and they do receive government funding. And I think that doesn't mean that any of their activities, therefore, is not well necessary and also deserves some recognition. But it's a very different way of civil society from other regions. And then you have to keep in mind that it is still very difficult for any outside NGO to get an accreditation and registration in any of these places. It's not only difficult for NGOs, it's also sometimes difficult for instance, cultural institutes or that are well known, like institutions like the British Council or the German Goethe Institute, or or exchange services for scholarships. So this is a very difficult place to work in, and now, of course, you all know that in the Russian Federation they have adopted some new laws which classify those NGOs which receive funding from the EU, from Western sources, as foreign agents. We do now have in some of the Central Asian states initiatives which go into the same direction. And that means that while we, of course, instinctively depart from the assumption that civil society is something positive, it's the core of our societies, it sustains the policies, and that's how actually you make the policies also fit with your people. But the Central Asian official government view of that would certainly be a very different one. And so they would actually, some of them would say, well, we have seen what they call color revolutions, instigated by what they see as NGOs funded from the outside. And so therefore, their major gut reaction to that is we have to control this very tightly. We have to make sure that nothing like that happens with us. So, and that means that some of what I would say is civil society in its initial stages, or in its infancy, is below the radar. It needs to be below the radar because otherwise it would attract attention which might not be helpful to them. But it also means that it sometimes is very difficult for us, for EU representatives, for EU NGOs, to even make these contacts. And if you do make these contacts, you actually sometimes might, that might be risky for actually your interlocutors. So it's a very difficult environment. However, that is not to say that this is not what needs to be done. It is evidently what needs to be done, but it needs to be done in a confidence-building mode. Confidence, which means that in some sense, addressing issues which are recognized as relevant from the policy side, from the government, and issues which are crucial also for everyday life, everyday needs and social needs, water needs, whatever, so that this engagement at the civil society level can be then recognized as a valuable contribution. And I think some of that is being done, for instance, you working with local water associations. Of course, the water associations are also part of, if you wish, an official setup. But they do manage then the local, water distribution, and therefore they are a necessary element of self-government. Yeah, so let me say just one other word, because I can't. Now, of course, in Central Asia, I think that very few people understand how the EU works and what it really is, and so I won't go further into that. But I think in terms of the image, we are, of course, simply because we are an international player, we are a big market, and they recognize it. Now, some of what you say, what the new member states have learned, well, again, yes, I wish that my conversations in Central Asia would turn to a situation where I could say, well, just accept that there are legitimate interests on the other side. So not everything is, it's not the only kind of judgment about what is right is not yours only. There are others, and these others have to be heard, have to be respected, and then you have to sit down, you have to find the compromises and to balance these differences. That's what we are trying to achieve all the time. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and I know that I promised to give a microphone back to Georgi, but we still have a little bit of time, and I think I have to be inclusive as the chair of the PASOS board, but also chair of this panel, to the audience who have patiently been sitting and listening to us for more than an hour now. And I would like to ask you, should you have any questions, interests, and discussions to ask the panelists while they still sit here? I propose that we transfer the fight in Western Balkans to the coffee break, very important. But I would like to open, I already see Marie is raising her hand at the very back of the audience, and I know she has a question. Please raise your hand, you have still another one, and there's another one. So 3 questions. We have a couple of minutes, so please be brief, and we will try to be smooth. Yes.
Thank you very much. Well, first a small remark and then a question, and it's mostly reacting to what Ms. Flor has just said about the difficulties of helping Central Asian civil society develop. Well, as it happens, this network has had a big project trying to help think tanks in Central Asia to develop and even to cooperate with local public administrations, I mean at national level, not at local level. So I think that of course we have to be cautious, of course we have to be aware of all the difficulties, and there are indeed cases when NGOs working in some of the more authoritarian countries have to pretend they're doing something else than what they're actually doing. But overall, and especially with countries like Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, where some extent of public policy really is possible, I think we shouldn't be overcautious and forget that unless we build the capacity of civil society, including the less likely versions of building capacity of policy process participation and think tanks and public dialogue, not just poverty reduction and fighting drug trafficking and other areas where we might be more immediately interested, I think we're not going to see much change happen, because the EU is perhaps one of the most likely sources of support for that change. Gradual and cautious, but it has to be more or less permanent. It shouldn't be very staggering, I think. I mean, of course, there are some good things happening. There are calls for proposals occasionally, etc. But overall, I don't think at the moment the EU is doing enough in that field, to be quite honest. And the question, it's very brief. So how do you envisage, given the rather low capacity of the academic and sort of, well, so-called intelligentsia circles in the Central Asian countries, given the rather low capacity of civil society, how do you envisage the public administration actually becoming more aware that they have to listen to the other side?
Thank you, Marie. We have 2 more questions, and maybe I could have a proposal. Is it also a Central Asian question? No. No? Okay, so I will give the phone to
First of all, yes, I agree with you, and if I created the impression that I think we should not engage in these projects, then certainly that was not my intention. So I think we need to work with them, and we need to find the right ways, and yes, I agree that we should actually be doing more on this area. Now, I think that there are some examples, like for instance Kazakhstan, but also some others, where you can see that the capacity of public administration and of the government structures actually is now improving, because you do have a younger generation with a different kind of education, with more exposure to also other experiences. So some of them have traveled, some of them have also studied abroad, have worked abroad. That of course also assists a lot in then transforming public services. However, I also think that at the end of the day, of course, that is a learning experience for the whole society, and it will need to reinforce each other between the civil society and also the public administration. And I think that I would also argue that the experience in some other parts of the world, like in Arab Spring, should show to everyone that participation of your broader public is a necessity, unless you want to risk that at some stage you actually have a different type of explosion in your own society. And there's one other issue which I want to raise, because there are, of course, in some of these countries, mahala, so there are self-organizing structures which come with an Islamic background. They have traditional roots in Central Asia. And I for instance, also, I don't think we have really tried to have a dialogue with them, but we should, because they are still regulating also many of the issues in these societies. But again, it's not an easy thing to do, but yes, we should work on this.
Okay. Piotr Kaniewicz, Institute of Public Affairs, Warsaw. Well, reading Mr. Wurmo's recommendations, I noticed you said one of the ways in which NGOs could increase their impact, and they would be called for doing that, would be to monitor the implementation of various commitments that these countries are making toward the EU. But there's a paradox. For the government, accession is a technical exercise. It is a box-ticking exercise, and they might not find the involvement of NGOs welcome. That there is a need, perhaps, for the EU to encourage the government. I mean, I've heard a lot of complaints about civil society, but I'm wondering whether the ball is not really in the field of the governments of these countries. When I hear that Macedonians say, well, 15% is a dream, what can the EU do? I mean, maybe we need to set a certain rule. I mean, there was a lot of complaint about this gender quota, but okay, this quota might have some deviations and problems, but the general principle of setting a certain indicator that needs to be reached, I think it has worked in our country, like in Poland. But I noticed a general principle. I had a doubt when I was reading Mr. Wurmo's paper. Is the pre-accession process the best time for developing civil society? There is a tension between meeting the obligations as fast as possible and involving, creating more participation. In some respects, Central Asia has a more comfortable position. We can take the time, and we don't have this time in Western Balkans. And so my question is, how do we tackle that? Thank you.
So, Nicola, really to give an insight in your answer, and we can continue later on in other, because we have taken a bit more time anyway.
No, okay. Okay, I'll do a little trick. I'll use thank you for the question. Also to give some more insights on what the issues Nicola raised. I fully agree with you. In fact, one of the things that needs to be done is to put more pressure. Nicola mentioned that in the progress reports there will be a section dedicated to civil society. Okay, but that's one of the measures, and actually what that should come out of a longer process, meaning that the European Commission and the EU must start pressuring more the governments on focusing on civil society development, rather than treating civil society development or involvement in policy processes just as a side dish. I mean, in the 12th priority list, the parliamentary reform, last year the government said, we agreed, here we have the reform, Brussels said, priority ticked. And it meant nothing to involving civil society in the parliamentary dealings. Although there are civil society organizations in Albania that have raised their voice for 5 years in a row that parliamentary proceedings are not fair and are not encouraging for civil society involvement. Despite that, Brussels just ticked that priority. Now, what I'm saying is that we need to get more serious. Do we need more time? Absolutely. Personally, I don't care when we are going to be members of the European Union, as long as being as soon as possible members of EU would mean that we would be members that are not ready to cope with everything else that is part of the EU. Civil society assessment. I mentioned also some Civicus data and other data in the policy brief. But on the USAID index, I know the index, I'm doing it for Albania for the past 3 years, together with other colleagues at IDM. There are also other issues that we can raise, but what the index is actually good is to follow the progress nationally. Personally, I wouldn't recommend the index as a tool to make country-to-country comparisons, and I didn't do any in the paper. Even in the matrix, actually, Nicola, maybe you didn't know, but we have some elements from the approach of the USID index in the matrix, because you cannot do it other way. For instance, you cannot go with a public perception asking 1,000 or 2,000 citizens about specific issues of the legal environment for civil society. You would expect civil society leaders to know about the legal aspects.
I think it's a very important note in methodology,
okay.
But I keep rushing and there's another question, so my suggestion is no, there is no questions cancelled. And that's excellent. But I know there is a... Yes, there's a compliment.
Yes, you are right. I mean, what happened in Poland in taxation? I mean, I think that in Western Balkans and Turkey we are doing more for civil society, we are considering more civil society than in the previous accession period. Now, it's true that there is no acquis. So we cannot say to a government, you are obliged to consult with civil society. But what we do is to raise the civil society agenda inside the enlargement policy in order to be more proactive in pushing the governments. I mean, you have to understand where are the priorities and where are the possibilities that we work. But if we do together, we will be more successful day after day.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you, our excellent panelists, for, I think, a very, very broad insight. And as members of PASOS and looking back at the teams that we worked in on different projects, offered quite an interesting insight on the challenges that we actually face in working together. I think the time and trust that it took that kept returning and returning to discussion in various shapes, sizes, and disguises, and reflect on those a bit more. The refreshing and taking time, as Nicola suggested. But now we will not take more time and move to the PASOS Award, a very important event in our annual agenda. And so thanking my excellent panelists. I hope that you stay for the award and also for the future discussions today. You're very welcome to join